The gas station intruder. Emily had always loved the quiet of rural Massachusetts, the way the nights were filled with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves rather than honking horns and sirens. But moving back home to her parents' farmhouse after her breakup had been a bittersweet decision. She'd left behind a fast-paced city life, her friends, and an independence she had worked so hard to build. Now, every creak in the old wooden floors and every shadow cast by the trees outside her window reminded her of how isolated she was. After finishing her late shift at the diner one Friday night, Emily felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. She wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and let the world fade away. The drive home was usually her favorite part of the day, a peaceful half-hour through winding country roads. But tonight, as she glanced at the glowing fuel gauge on her dashboard dipping dangerously close to empty, she sighed. The detour to the gas station was unavoidable. The station was the kind you might drive past without noticing during the day. At night, its flickering fluorescent light gave it an eerie quality, like a setting from a horror movie. As Emily pulled in, she noticed an old, rusted pickup truck parked off to the side. The engine was running, its low rumble barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent light. She hesitated for a moment before stepping out, scanning the area for any signs of life. The attendant's booth was empty, and the road behind her was pitch black. Emily swiped her card at the pump, her fingers trembling slightly from the cold. She kept glancing at the pickup truck, where she could just make out a shadowy figure sitting in the driver's seat. She tried to shake off her unease, focusing instead on the rhythmic clicking of the pump as it dispensed fuel. She was almost finished when the truck door creaked open. "Evenin'," a voice called out. She turned her head sharply, her heart skipping a beat. A man was walking toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. He wore a tattered leather jacket, his unkempt hair poking out from under a dirty baseball cap. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but she could see the glint of his teeth as he smiled. "Hi," Emily replied, her voice tight. She gripped the pump nozzle like a lifeline. "You out here all alone?" he asked, his tone casual but tinged with something that made her skin crawl. "Just heading home," she said, forcing a polite smile. She glanced back at her car, mentally calculating how quickly she could get inside and lock the doors. "You want to see a trick?" he said, pulling a lighter from his pocket. Without waiting for her response, he lit a piece of string, holding it up as it sparked and fizzled out in a small puff of smoke. "Pretty cool, huh?" Emily nodded stiffly. "Yeah, impressive." Her hand shook as she replaced the nozzle, the clink of metal echoing louder than it should have in the stillness of the night. She climbed into her car as quickly as she could, locking the doors the moment they shut behind her. The man stood there, watching her with that same crooked grin. She pulled out of the lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. In her rearview mirror, she saw him still standing by the pump, his silhouette shrinking into the darkness as she drove away. The drive home was anything but peaceful. Emily kept glancing in her mirrors, half expecting to see the headlights of the pickup truck following her. Every shadow cast by the trees lining the road seemed to stretch toward her, and every bump in the asphalt felt like an omen. By the time she reached her parents' house, her nerves were frayed. The farmhouse was dark, save for the faint glow of a lamp in the living room. Her parents were early risers, and she knew they'd already gone to bed. She parked her car in the gravel driveway and hurried to the front door, fumbling with her keys. A thought struck her as she turned the lock. Had she remembered to lock the door when she left that morning? Her stomach twisted. She pushed the thought aside, telling herself it didn't matter now. She was home, and she was safe, or so she thought. It wasn't until hours later, when Emily woke to the sound of creaking floorboards, that she realized how wrong she had been. The noise was faint, but in the oppressive silence of the farmhouse, it might as well have been a gunshot. She sat up in bed, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought she might have imagined it. Then it came again, closer this time. Her heart raced as she grabbed her phone from the nightstand. She texted her dad, the words barely coherent through her shaking fingers. "Someone's in the house. I think they broke in. Don't go downstairs. Call 911. She strained her ears, listening for any other sounds. The creaking continued, each step methodical, deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. Moments later, she heard her father's bedroom door creak open. Her stomach dropped. She wanted to scream at him to stay put, but her voice caught in her throat. She heard his heavy footsteps descending the stairs, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Who the hell are you?" her father bellowed. Emily scrambled out of bed, her pulse hammering in her ears. She reached the top of the stairs just in time to see her father grappling with a man in the dining room. It was him, the man from the gas station. He had been hiding under the table, clutching a knife taken from their kitchen. Her father managed to wrestle the man to the ground, but the intruder broke free, shoving him into a chair that splintered under his weight. The man bolted for the back door, disappearing into the woods just as the wail of sirens pierced the night. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and uniformed officers. The police searched the area but found no sign of the intruder. They did, however, find the spare key hidden under the mat by the back door. Emily felt a wave of nausea as she realized how easily he had gained access to the house. He must have followed her home, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her father insisted he was fine, brushing off the bruises on his arms as nothing more than minor inconveniences. But Emily could see the tension in his jaw, the way he glanced at the windows as if expecting the man to return. Her mother, usually a pillar of calm, looked shaken as she spoke to the police, her hands trembling slightly. In the weeks that followed, the farmhouse became a fortress. Her father installed deadbolts on every door and a state-of-the-art security system. Emily started parking her car in the garage, double-checking the locks every night before bed. But no amount of precaution could erase the memory of that night, or the lingering fear that it could happen again. Emily began planning her move back to the city, determined to rebuild her independence. But she knew she would carry the lesson with her wherever she went. Trust your instincts, stay vigilant, and never, ever let your guard down, even in the places you think are safe. The restroom stalker. Driving at night always had its pros and cons, and for Josh, the quiet roads were worth the eerie, lonely stretches. He was midway through a 15-hour road trip, the kind that tested both patience and bladder control. His playlist hummed softly in the background, but fatigue was creeping in. The highway stretched endlessly, lit only by the occasional overhead lamp. A rest area loomed ahead, and though it was late, almost 2:30 a.m., he decided to stop. A quick bathroom break and a stretch would help him push through the remaining 6 hours of his journey. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a couple of cars parked at the far end. The restroom building stood under a dim fluorescent light, its door slightly ajar. Josh grabbed his phone and keys, locking his car before heading in. The stillness of the place felt oppressive, but he told himself it was nothing. It was late after all. Inside, the restroom smelled faintly of bleach, mingled with something less pleasant. The hum of the fluorescent light was loud, an incessant buzz that seemed to echo off the tiled walls. Josh made his way to a stall, relieved to find it clean enough for use. He locked the door behind him and tried to relax, but a noise, a faint shuffle of feet, caught his attention. He froze, ears straining. Someone else was in the restroom. He hadn't seen anyone enter, nor had he heard the door creak open. The sound of footsteps grew louder, then stopped abruptly, just outside his stall. He held his breath, his heart thudding in his chest. Through the narrow gap in the door, he saw the edge of a shoe, worn leather, the sole caked with dirt. "Occupied," Josh said, his voice steady but firm. There was no response. The shoe didn't move. A chill ran down Josh's spine. He stayed silent, waiting for the person to leave. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated, the door to the restroom creaking open and slamming shut. Josh let out a shaky breath, finishing as quickly as he could. He exited the stall cautiously, his eyes darting around the restroom. It was empty. He washed his hands, splashing cold water on his face to shake off the lingering unease. Outside, the parking lot was just as he had left it, silent and still. A glance at his car reassured him it was untouched, and he hurried back to the safety of the driver's seat. Back on the highway, Josh couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, he checked his rearview mirror, scanning for headlights that might indicate he was being followed. The road behind him was empty. His nerves began to settle, and he laughed at himself for overreacting. "Just some weirdo," he muttered under his breath. "It's late. People act strange." Another hour passed, and his need for caffeine outweighed his desire to avoid another stop. He pulled into a larger rest area, this one better lit and bustling with a few travelers despite the late hour. He parked near the building and made his way inside, the smell of stale coffee hitting him as soon as he entered. A small convenience store sat to the left, but his first stop was the restroom. This restroom was newer, cleaner, and brighter than the last. Josh felt a little more at ease as he stepped inside. He chose a stall near the back, locking the door and pulling out his phone to scroll through social media. He had just started reading a post when a shadow fell across the gap under the stall door. His stomach dropped. Someone was standing there, completely still. Josh's heart pounded as he lowered his phone, leaning down slightly to get a better look. The shoes were unmistakable, worn leather, dirt-caked soles. It was the same person from the previous rest area. "Hey," Josh said, his voice sharper this time. "What's your problem?" No answer. The shadow didn't move. Josh's mind raced. Was this guy following him? Was it a coincidence? His hand tightened around his phone, and he opened the dial pad, his thumb hovering over the numbers. The shadow shifted slightly, and a low, raspy chuckle filled the air. Josh's blood ran cold. He made a decision in that moment. Holding his phone close to his mouth, he raised his voice. "Yeah, I'm at the rest area off I-95. There's a guy in the restroom acting creepy. I think he's been following me. Can you send someone out here?" He made sure to emphasize police, even though he hadn't actually hit the call button yet. The shadow froze. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, as if realizing Josh wasn't bluffing, the man's footsteps retreated rapidly. Josh heard the restroom door slam open, followed by the sound of hurried steps outside. He waited, his heart hammering in his chest, before cautiously exiting the stall. The restroom was empty. Josh peeked out the door, scanning the parking lot. A dark figure darted into the trees at the edge of the lot, disappearing into the shadows. Josh didn't wait to see if the man would return. He sprinted to his car, locking the doors and starting the engine in one fluid motion. For the rest of the drive, Josh couldn't relax. Every set of headlights in his rearview mirror made his pulse spike, and every shadow on the side of the road looked like a figure waiting to step out. He didn't stop again until he reached his destination, parking in the driveway of his brother's house just as the sun began to rise. When he recounted the story to his brother later that morning, the older man shook his head. "You're lucky you scared him off," he said. "Guys like that, you never know what they're capable of." Josh nodded, still shaken. The encounter had left him rattled, but it had also taught him a valuable lesson. The dangers of traveling alone at night weren't limited to women or the young. Anyone could become a target, and the only thing that had saved him was his quick thinking. He made a promise to himself that day: no more late-night stops, no matter how tired he was. And no matter where he was, he'd always trust his instincts and stay on high alert. The memory of those dirt-caked shoes and the raspy chuckle would ensure he never let his guard down again. The staged car trouble scam? It was 4 a.m., the darkest hour before dawn, when Kevin found himself pulling into the parking lot of a Wendy's off the New Jersey Turnpike. He was halfway through a grueling solo drive from New York to Florida, running on caffeine and sheer determination. His plan was simple: grab a quick bite, stretch his legs, and maybe catch a short nap before hitting the road again. The lot was almost deserted. The only other vehicles were a beat-up sedan parked near the entrance and a couple of semi-trucks idling in the far corner. Kevin parked his car under a dim overhead light, making a mental note of how eerily quiet everything was. The silence was heavy, interrupted only by the faint hum of the trucks. As he stepped out of his car, the sound of approaching footsteps made him turn. A man was walking toward him from the direction of the sedan. He was in his mid-30s, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, his hands shoved into his pockets. Something about the way he moved, hurried yet hesitant, made Kevin uneasy. "Hey man," the stranger called out, his voice carrying a tinge of urgency. "Sorry to bother you, but I need some help. My car battery's dead, and I left my jumper cables at home. Could you give me a hand?" Kevin hesitated. The man's request wasn't unusual. He'd helped strangers with car trouble before. Still, the timing and setting felt off. Who gets stranded at a fast food parking lot at 4 a.m.? His instincts told him to decline, but the man's expression, a mix of desperation and frustration, tugged at his conscience. "All right," Kevin said, forcing a smile. "Let me grab my cables." The stranger nodded, stepping back as Kevin popped his trunk. The parking lot felt darker now, the faint hum of the trucks suddenly ominous. Kevin retrieved his jumper cables and walked toward the sedan. The stranger followed close behind, a little too close for comfort. When they reached the sedan, Kevin noticed it was unusually clean for an older car. The hood was already propped open, and the engine bay was spotless, almost as if it had been prepped for display. Something about it felt staged. Before Kevin could dwell on the thought, headlights flooded the lot. Two trucks pulled in simultaneously, their engines roaring as they parked on either side of Kevin's car. The doors opened, and several men climbed out, their faces obscured by hats and shadows. Kevin's heart raced as he realized he was boxed in. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked, his voice sharp with alarm. The stranger didn't respond. Instead, he took a step back, his hands still in his pockets, a sly grin spreading across his face. Kevin's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt frozen. One of the men from the trucks approached, holding a crowbar casually at his side. "Just stay quiet, and you won't get hurt," he said, his tone calm but menacing. Kevin's fight-or-flight response kicked in. He wasn't about to stick around and find out what these guys had planned. Dropping the jumper cables, he turned and bolted toward the woods bordering the parking lot. Behind him, he heard shouts and the pounding of boots on asphalt. The woods were dense and dark, the ground uneven beneath Kevin's feet. Branches whipped against his face and arms as he ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't dare look back, focusing only on putting as much distance as possible between himself and the men chasing him. After what felt like an eternity, the shouts grew fainter, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the sound of his own heartbeat. Kevin crouched behind a tree, struggling to catch his breath. He stayed there for several minutes, straining his ears for any signs of pursuit. The forest was silent. Cautiously, Kevin made his way back toward the parking lot, keeping to the shadows. When he reached the edge of the woods, he stopped, peering out from behind a tree. The trucks were gone, as was the sedan. His car was still there, parked under the same dim light, but the trunk was open and the passenger side window was shattered. Kevin's stomach sank as he approached his car. The interior was a mess. Glove compartment emptied, seats slashed, and most of his belongings gone. His suitcase, laptop, and even the small stash of cash he kept hidden under the seat were missing. The only thing left untouched was his phone, which he'd thankfully taken with him when he ran. Shaking with adrenaline and anger, Kevin dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was a lifeline as he explained what had happened. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car arrived, its flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the scene. The officers took Kevin's statement, nodding grimly as he described the events. "We've been seeing more of these kinds of setups," one of them said. "Fake car trouble, coordinated with multiple vehicles. They target travelers at rest stops and parking lots. You're lucky you got away." The officers examined the area but found no immediate evidence beyond the broken glass. Kevin mentioned the trucks, but the descriptions were too vague to be useful. When they ran the license plate of the sedan in the security footage from Wendy's, it came back as fake. The trail was cold. In the days that followed, Kevin couldn't shake the incident from his mind. The image of the stranger's sly grin and the calm threat of the man with the crowbar replayed in his head on a loop. He felt violated, not just by the loss of his belongings, but by the realization that his kindness had been weaponized against him. "I always believed in karma," he told a friend later. "I thought helping someone would come back around in a good way. But now, I don't know. I feel stupid for stopping." His friend tried to reassure him. "It's not stupid to want to help people. It's just, the world's a dangerous place sometimes." Kevin nodded but remained unconvinced. He started avoiding nighttime drives altogether, planning his trips during daylight hours and sticking to busy, well-lit stops. The lesson was painful but clear. Not everyone who asks for help has good intentions. Weeks later, Kevin received a call from the police. The case remained unsolved, the thieves long gone. The officer on the other end offered a small consolation. "You did the right thing by running. Most people freeze and it doesn't end well. You're lucky to be alive." The words stayed with Kevin, a grim reminder of how close he had come to something far worse than theft. From that night on, he vowed to trust his instincts, even if it meant seeming rude or paranoid. Kindness was still important to him, but he'd learned to temper it with caution. As he drove down that same stretch of highway months later, now in broad daylight, Kevin couldn't help but glance at every rest stop he passed. The memories lingered, a permanent mark on his sense of safety. And though the road stretched out endlessly before him, it no longer felt as inviting as it once had. The stories we've shared today are chilling reminders of how danger can strike when we least expect it. At a gas station, on the road, or in the quiet moments of a late-night drive, they teach us important lessons about vigilance, trusting our instincts, and prioritizing safety over convenience or politeness. When you're traveling, especially late at night, remember these key takeaways. Always stay aware of your surroundings. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Keep your doors locked and have a plan for emergencies. Your safety is worth more than a moment of doubt or hesitation. These stories aren't just about fear. They're about survival, smart decisions, and taking control in vulnerable situations. If this video resonated with you, or if you've ever experienced something similar, share your story in the comments. Your experience could help others stay safe. And if you found these tips helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to spread awareness. Together, we can learn to stay safe and protect ourselves and our loved ones. Stay alert, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.